Hi, this is Tim Weber with South Texas College coming to you with another lecture video. This one on the topic of late adulthood, psychological and social development. So let's bring up our outline to use and make sure we have a pointer so you can see where I am on the outline sometimes when I remember. And let's get rid of my face. And there, I think we're about ready to go. Okay, so here are some topics then that we'll be picking up. First of all, theories about how people age in terms of their psychological and social development in late adulthood. We'll also have a look at various relationships in late adulthood, particularly that of friends, relatives, spouse. We'll be looking at coping with retirement if it comes for that person, and the frail elderly. And we'll also have a little bit of examination of the problem of elder abuse. So, first of all, I want you to just do a little imagination exercise with me. Would you picture in your mind a man who's in their 80s? Okay, so conjure up in your mind what that would look like. Okay, I want to show you something. Okay, let me see if I can. Okay, should be here. Yeah, okay. So this is Tonio, and he has lived on the ranch where I hunt for almost all of his life. And what would you guess his age to be? Well, he's actually in his 80s. And does that square with the picture that you had in your mind of an 80-year-old man? And a lot of you are probably going to say, no, I didn't picture someone out here doing, hard physical work and seeming to be quite physically capable, yet he is. And so this kind of points out that there are such a wide range of outcomes with people in late adulthood. And you have some carrying very strong physical capabilities into late adulthood, like Tonio. And you have others who are very infirm and in need of constant assistance. And so we have such a variety here. And we have to take that into account when we're looking at this. So when we get into late adulthood, being that there is such a wide range of outcomes, then we have to think of people as individuals and see where they're at. Having said that, all people are going to experience some changes as they get into the latter part of their life, and those changes do tend to accelerate as people reach age 65. So we also have that side of it. Okay, so the changes are more significant for some people, less so for others. That said, as people recognize that there are changes occurring in themselves, whether they're physical, whether they're in terms of mental capabilities or what have you, as they recognize this, often there's going to be a need to find some comfort and stability as these things change. And so in late adulthood, adults may take comfort in a number of things. They may take comfort in interacting with their family. That gives them a way to connect the past with the future and to give them some role in looking towards a better future. In other cases, they may take pleasure in simply maintaining their daily routines and doing things as they typically do. And so that can be a way of expressing a consistent identity that as I do this routine daily, this gives me a sense that I'm still here, it's still me. And it also gives them a sense of continuity, that there is something that is stable in their in their life, that they continue to keep up that routine, whatever it may be. They also may take comfort in simply keeping up with current events. And so this is a way then that they can stay engaged in the world. They feel like then they're still participating in the world. So that can give them some comfort, just keeping up with what's going on. So we'll now look at some theories about how people cope with aging, late adulthood. And some of these then are self theories. So these emphasize the person's core self, their identity, how they see themselves, their their goals, their values and beliefs, and their personal history. So this then is going to emphasize trying to maintain some integrity, that those things fit together, and maintaining one's identity as a person. So Eric Erikson then suggested that in late adulthood, the psychosocial developmental task was to achieve a sense of integrity. So what's that? Well, integrity, the older person looks back on their life and they want to see kind of how it all fits together, how it all contributes to something that had some purpose. And so if they can look back on their life and say, I see how this fits together, I see how this led to something useful and beneficial, that's that sense of integrity that enables them to cope with aging effectively. On the other hand, if they look back and they say, I don't know, it doesn't fit together, it doesn't make any sense, I didn't accomplish anything, it was just one damn thing after another, they're going to fall into a sense of despair, according to Erikson. And so they're going to look at it and say, it was all for nothing, doesn't make any sense, I didn't achieve anything useful, and now it's too late to change it. I don't have any time left. So despair sits in. That's a pretty sad thing to see a person at that age in a sense of despair that their life to them seems to have been just wasted time. Now, that sense of integrity also then can come about as older adults seek to integrate their unique experience with their vision of community. So they look back at what they've learned in life, giving them that sense of integrity, and then they want to look into the future. Can we influence the future for better? And so can we provide others a way forward in the future based on what they've learned? And so they're going to want to share those insights that they've gained with us younger folks. Okay, so they're also looking forward in how they can pass that on to the next generations. So identity theory then, which is one of these self types of theories, says that also the person is going to try to once again reaffirm their identity. So we're going to have a reoccurrence, if you will, of this examining oneself and who am I as a unique individual? Because you know what, over our lifespan, we're not just one individual, if you will, we're different individuals at different times, okay? And so as they see that they're not the same as they were as a teenager, they're not the same as they were in emerging adulthood, middle adulthood, they're going to have to re-examine identity and say, now who am I as an older person? Okay, Um, just what are my goals, what are my aspirations, what are my beliefs, and so on, and how do I see myself now? And they need to update that. Yeah, they need to update that identity, and that's kind of also, self-awareness, right? And recognizing what they still can do and what they maybe are not able to do, how their body has changed in its functioning and form and so forth. So there's a whole bunch of that. Um, so each new experience, gain or loss, requires reassessing one's identity. How will you see yourself? Now, again, if that older person is not doing this, then you have a role confusion and they may not be coping well with those changes. Um, and what things do bring on these reconsiderations of one's identity? Well, a lot of the pillars of self-concept may begin to crumble as you get older. Your appearance changes, your health may change, your employment may change. You might not work as much as before. Maybe you have to do different kinds of work, maybe retire. So all these things, as these occur, are going to cause that person to re-examine who they are as a person, at least hopefully so. So one of the ways then that the person may deal with the changes that come with aging is through a process of selective optimization. And sometimes they call this also selective optimization with compensation. And I'll tell you why with compensation in a minute. So this is, again, consistent with these self theories. In selective optimization, the person has a goal to maintain some important aspect of themselves, to maybe maintain certain activities that really are important to them. And so as they assess their abilities, they find that they're no longer able to engage in that activity in the same way that they were before. Their abilities have changed. So they have to figure out how are they going to accomplish that goal to continue that particular activity, given their limitations that they have. So as an example, you might have an older person, and throughout their life, they have enjoyed playing music, being a musician. So as they get older, they find that now their fingers are stiffer and they can't play that guitar in the same way that they were able to do before. They can't move as quickly across that fingerboard, but they still want to be a musician. They still want to play that guitar. So what do? They switch to playing kind of the slower ballads that they're able to then keep up with more readily, and they can continue to be a musician. So they're working around their limitations to continue that important activity. And I'll give you another example from the ranch, since we're stuck on that today. I was told by the current owners of the ranch that years ago, one of their ancestors, actually the grandfather, I think, of current owners, as he got older, um, his vision began to go. And so, of course, all his life he had driven around the ranch on his pickup, taking care of all kinds of things. And so he wanted to continue to get out there on that ranch and do the various types of work that needed to be done, mend fences and what have you. Um, but because his vision was going, it got dangerous for him to drive that pickup around. In fact, it's really too dangerous for him to drive it on the road for sure. Well, so he figured out a way to overcome this and get around that. So he would have his nephew to ride in the pickup with him whenever he wanted to go out and do some work there. And his nephew then would help him with his driving and for his visual impairment, and he'd say, Theo, take a right here. Okay, here's where you're at the right place. I take a right there. Or Theo, watch out, you're headed right straight for a tree. Go to the left, stuff like that. So he was able to get out there and continue to do the things he'd like to do in spite of that visual limitation. Although they did say, well, the truck ended up with an awful lot of dents in it, so this wasn't 100% effective. But you get the idea. So he was able to keep doing what he wanted to do, working around limitations, selective optimization with compensation. Okay, so now let's also look at continuity theory. Again, this is a part of self theory, you might say. So continuity, of course, is what? Things staying the same. So this is where this would suggest that when experiencing changes of aging, the person's behavior doesn't change from earlier years. So how they interact with other people in relationships tends to be consistent to a great extent. Methods of coping with difficulties tend to be consistent. So continuity. An example here, methods of coping. So if you have an older person that when they had difficulties in their earlier years, they would spend time with friends and family and take refuge in their relationships with others. Or as they get older, they probably are going to cope with difficulties in a similar way. On the other hand, if they cope with it by taking to drinking, then they're likely to do that as an elderly person as well, cope that way. So there's some consistency in how, even if it's looks a little bit different. Now, let's shift to a different viewpoint or something that picks up a whole different set of behaviors, and that would be stratification theories. So stratification theory suggests that social forces are going to limit the individual's choices in late adulthood. They're going to limit the type of activities, relationships that they can engage in. Notice not by personal choice, but rather social forces. And so these limitations then are based on social strata, the social category that person is placed in. This then can affect that person's ability to function in late adulthood. So we have stratification. Oh, I should explain that. Stratification is what? Dividing people up into different groups, okay? Different groups. So stratification by age. This would where we see the older person as part of a distinct category, different from other adults, children, and so forth. And so then social forces may create norms where older people are limited in the places that they can go, the activities that they can do. So this is the idea that, okay, you're part of that group there, that elderly group. And so, yeah, you shouldn't, you're not to be engaging in athletic competition. You're not to be hanging out at the bar late at night. You're maybe that's not so bad. Not so bad limitation. You're not to be, going to college. Okay, you're not to be out there in the workforce. Yeah, all those sorts of things. And so this, though, we find to be more prominent in developed nations like the US and so on, where older people are seen as being a distinct category, okay? You don't see that so much in less developed parts of the world, okay? Here, it would be very unusual to go to, say, a mechanic shop and find there an elderly person in their 80s, working on cars. Okay, but you go to some less developed parts of the world, and there's really no age at which people stop doing things. If they can do it, they're still doing it. And it would not be unusual in those parts of the world to find an 80-some-year-old mechanic still working to the extent that they could. So that's kind of an artificial thing in some ways that we're placing on people. Now, there are a couple ways then that the older person can respond to this stratification by age. And one can be simply the disengagement approach. So here, as the roles that the person is permitted to fill become increasingly narrow, they simply relinquish roles as time goes on. They withdraw from interaction in society. They become passive, sit down on their rocking chair, and just watch life go by, if this is across the board. Okay, so here they simply accept that, okay, I guess I'm too old to be doing that. I could do it, but maybe. I, you know, um, the activity approach here, the elderly person wants and needs to remain active, so they want to continue activities, interactions with relatives and friends, community groups, just as they did before. So they only withdraw unwillingly, only when forced to, as a result of ageism. So even if they're capable of doing this, um, they will continue to want to do it, even if they're not capable. They want to continue those activities. Now, each of these may be appropriate in circumstances. So there's a certain point, yeah, when a person probably does need to disengage from certain activities. Maybe there's a certain point where it's no longer safe for that person to drive. And so, you know, that might be appropriate. On the other hand, when the person does this across the board and disengages while still capable, what happens? They sit down on that rocking chair and they become inactive, and what capabilities they have begin to diminish rapidly through disuse. And so you see that physically, where the older person being told, well, you shouldn't be exercising, you shouldn't, they sit down, they don't do anything, and they lose their physical capabilities very rapidly. So there is also a danger in what disengaging from things that one is still capable of. And in terms of this activity approach, here we have where that might be very appropriate. If the person is able to do those activities, why not remain active in that way? Because that's going to enable them to maintain their mental, physical capabilities longer than if they disengage. On the other hand, there are situations where this is inappropriate and the person really does need to withdraw from some particular role. Yeah, maybe they were, the president of an organization in the community, some community organization, and they used to be able to do that well, but now there's some mental decline and they no longer can keep up with that. Or maybe it has to do with driving or doing certain types of exercise that maybe they can't do, and they really do need to disengage or adapt their approach. So notice that, some mix of these is usually appropriate. Now, we can also look at the effects of stratification of the elderly in terms of gender. Okay, so dividing the elderly male and female, and we know that a disproportionate number of elderly people are female. There's a much higher percentage of elderly people female as opposed to male. And so there is then also some segregation of women and looking at them as being different than older men, older women different than older men. And so mm, traditionally, this meant that older women might have less access to financial resources. They may have retired early to care for an aging spouse. They may not have had access to pension plans that men did years ago, or even access to medical insurance as readily as men did. And so this predicts that women as a whole would be worse off than men as they age. We also can look at stratification in terms of ethnicity and race. So people are categorized by others in terms of their ethnicity or race. It's a type of stratification again. So according to stratification theory, people who are of ethnic or racial minorities more likely to be poor. That's fact. Okay. And also more likely to experience discrimination. And so this again suggests that if you are a member, if you're a person of a minority racial or ethnic group, that you would fare worse in late adulthood than those who are of the majority group. Um, to give you an example of this, one of the things that we know is if you're elderly and you're Black, you're less likely to own your own home as opposed to if you're elderly and white. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. You know, years ago, there was a great deal of discrimination against Blacks in terms of housing. And there were all sorts of kind of backroom strategies to keep Black people from moving into neighborhoods where housing was available, where it was affordable. There was all kinds of unfair lending practices where Blacks were not offered loans that whites would have been offered and so forth. And just the fact that economic opportunities for Blacks were not as good as for whites mean that they often did not have the means as well. And so therefore we have, yes, elderly Black people less likely to own their own home. Now, what's that mean? Well, if you're elderly and you own your own home, you've got an advantage because most likely it's by that time pretty much paid off, if not fully paid off. So you've got a place to live for free, or if not, you have a lot of equity in that property that you can use should you need some money. And so yeah, it's advantageous. And so here's a situation where racism would suggest that Black people would be at a disadvantage as elderly people. Now, when looking at outcomes, though, what they found is they didn't quite come out as predicted by this theory. It turns out that you may be better off being female, non-white, if you're elderly. Okay, so why would that be? What is it that caused this theory not to pan out when it came to predicting um, across the board on average? And one thing you might look at is maybe one of the reasons that people of various minority groups do better than predicted would be, for example, Blacks, Hispanics often are highly respected within their families, churches nurtured by them, having a lot of strong relationships within their families or church family. Um, and so this might help account for why they're doing better than would be predicted in spite of some of the disadvantages that they may have experienced. And here again, we see in some studies in California that Asians and Hispanic elderly people were often outliving their white contemporaries. So again, we might look at the importance of close relationships within families, other things within their community as probably the factor there. Okay, so what are older people actually doing? And so here's some interesting things that they found that people may be doing in late adulthood. Some people may be continuing their education, and it may be simply that older person, they always wanted to learn about something, learn a new language or learn how to weld or whatever it was. And now they have the time available for it and maybe the means to do it now. And so they'll pick up on actually learning something new. And this is also evident in something that we don't maybe see right here in the Rio Grande Valley where we live, but in other places you have this thing called elder hostel at universities and colleges when those are on break, when the students are not living in the dorms there. People can actually come and take classes. They're the elderly people, and so they actually do have a lot of them doing that. It's pretty amazing. So what about also engaging in volunteer work? I think we have sort of a stereotype that older people may volunteer, and so that is true. That said, there's a little bit of nuance to this that you might want to be aware of. Okay. Do people age 65 and older, do they volunteer more or less than younger people? You're probably going to say, well, I think they do more. But here's the actual statistics from a few years ago. Pattern's probably not too much different now, though. What you notice is that, yeah, as people get past, age 55 even, and 65 and up, that the percentage of individuals who volunteer actually does decrease, seems to actually peak in middle adulthood in terms of percentage of people who are volunteering. So, yeah, percentage does drop. That said, when you look at the number of hours of volunteering, that's where you find the older people actually contributing, whereas a smaller percentage are able to do it. What you also find is when they do, they tend to provide more hours of volunteer work. And a lot of volunteer work doesn't really show up in these statistics. Like, what about, caring for another older person who lives down the street and helping them out, or caring for one's grandkids? I mean, that's kind of a type of volunteering as well. It's not paid work, right? And that's not reflected here as well. So, but in terms of percentage of people who do, I guess you would say, documented kind of volunteer work, there's a drop. Oh, by the way, why would that be? A number of reasons. So first of all, as people get older, some of them do develop some limitations that they're not able to do it. Some of them, transportation to the volunteer work is a limitation, just getting there. In other cases, it may be they simply may not feel as welcome as they get older. In other cases, it may be the volunteer work has changed. And for example, maybe volunteering as a receptionist, front desk at the hospital. And in the past, it didn't require using a computer, but now to do that, you got to be able to work a computer to do that volunteer role. And so they may no longer feel comfortable with it. So there's a number of factors there that come in play. Now, also in late adulthood, religious involvement is another aspect of life that becomes more prominent in some ways and less so in others. So what about the question, as people get older, do they attend religious services more than before or less than before? And the actual statistics tell us that they actually, attendance at religious services actually decreases in the elderly. However, the other side of that, engaging in religious practices like reading scriptures, prayer, doing good deeds for others, and so forth, increases. Okay, so again, that's a little nuance to this, right? Now, again, you say, well, why is that the older person may be less likely to attend religious services than before? Okay, and here's some of the reasons. Again, it may be physical limitations. It may be that they simply no longer have the transportation to get to where those religious services are offered. It may be that also the limitations of the place where worship occurs. They may have to climb stairs to get into the building, and they're not able to do it anymore. Maybe they find that within the building, the lighting is really not that great, so they're not able to read to keep to participate. Maybe the sound is not that good. They can't hear what's going on well. And so they find that, they really feel that they can't participate adequately. It may also be that health reasons, they're not able to get out like they used to as they get older. And so there's a number of reasons that they may not participate as much. That said, being able to still do these other things uh, without being limited in these ways, they may actually increase their activity in those areas of actual religious practices. Now, one of the things also that research showed is that being involved in various religious activities correlated with better physical and emotional health in older adults. And so, of course, then the question is, well, why is that? Because it shows up across a wide variety of religious faiths. It's not limited to just one particular religious faith. And so it appears that it's more than simply the beliefs of that particular religious faith, although those might be advantageous as well. So, what is it across the board that seems to provide this boost to physical and emotional health? Well, for one thing, when one is engaged in these type of activities, most religious faiths encourage healthy lifestyle practice, taking care of your body, eating right, avoiding the abuse of drugs, and so on. So simply the encouragement to live a healthy life and be a good steward of your body may be part of it. Another is that when one engages in religious activities, also often that involves our interactions with others. And so social relationships are increased, and that lends to better physical and psychological health as well. And the mm, the elements of that religious faith, the beliefs and ideas that are part of it, can help give that person a sense of meaning in life. They can help them interpret age, death, as it approaches in a way that is helpful to them, thereby reducing stress as one faces the changes of age, death, and the meaning of life. So there you have some thoughts as to why this is beneficial. And once again, we're going to say specific elements of that religious faith also may be beneficial, but that may vary from one religious faith to another. Okay, well, are older people generally politically active? Yes. How active are they in, say, voting? Well, here we have some voter registration stuff. Yeah, I need to do some updating here, but I can show you some trends here. And you notice that in 1974, um, the elderly were what, second highest in terms of voter registrations. By 1990, they had become the most numerous, highest percentage of any age group that was registered to vote, and still held up this next time, still holding up today. Okay, so in terms of voting, the elderly tend to be one of the most active groups, and in fact, that gives them quite a bit of political power because they do vote in higher numbers than younger people. They may have a greater influence on the political outcomes. Also, there are organizations that advocate for the elderly in terms of trying to promote legislation that would benefit them. Things like the AARP that advocate for them and lobby for laws that would benefit them. So the elderly tend to have a disproportionate amount of political power. Those of you who are younger, you might be concerned about that. um, Maybe you should make sure that you and your friends vote next time around so that you can have your say. Um, Promote that right to vote. The other side of that too is that they did do some study of this, and they found that yes, the elderly tended to vote for people who might promote laws that would benefit them, but they also were really uh, quite interested in taking into account how those would impact younger people as well. And so they did have some concern about, yeah, also promoting things that would benefit not just themselves, but others as well. So maybe our fears that they're going to take over the entire country is unfounded. Well, anyways, oh, by the way, next presidential election, it looks like it's coming down to what? Biden and Trump both in their 70s. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Yeah, older adults seem to have some, yeah, um, disproportionate influence on politics, you might say. Okay. Now, looking at retirement. And so, well, what percentage of older people do you suppose are in the workforce? Okay. Again, I need to do some updating of my stats here. But here's what we have in terms of men. You can see the pattern was increasing in the 2000s. And I'm going to say, just from casual reading, it looks like, yeah, we still have a good proportion of the elderly who are still working. In fact, maybe somewhat more. Same thing with women. Once again, um, yes, there is some drop in that from its peak here, but probably is going to be going up again because the age for collecting Social Security in the last few years, that age has gone up. So you have to work more years to collect the full amount. And so people are probably going to try to work longer. I know in my case, yeah, I'll be working. Um, yeah, the goal is to keep working till I'm 70 because that's the point when I'll get the full amount. So, yeah. Okay. So let's stop there. I'll make a video to pick up relationships, the frail elderly, topic of elder abuse. So that'll be coming in the next video. Let's call it quits here. I need a break, you need a break, and hope you're having a great day. So there